Alright, so hello everybody, very good morning. Welcome to the Time of Your Life Celebration 2022. This event jointly organized by the National Library Board and the Singapore University of Social Sciences. Once again, my name is Lester Liu, very happy to be the MC for this event today. So the title of today's webinar, The Hindsight Window, Mastering Your Internal State. In today's session, you will learn how to take control of your internal state for greater happiness and peace of mind. But before we begin, just a gentle reminder, there will be a Q&A session. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask our speaker, please do drop it into the Q&A icon either on the top or the bottom of your screen. Now also, do note that to ensure that everyone enjoys a very seamless experience, now the chat functions, microphone and video functions have been disabled. So what do we have on the cards today? We will first begin our session with a sharing by Mr. Eric Edmeades, followed by a Q&A session, which will be moderated by Dr. Vimalan Manokara. After which, we will have Matsura, librarian from NLB, to share with us on the NLB resources, and we will also be sharing with you about the SUSS Gerontology program. Now, we hope that this online webinar will help us celebrate the time of your life by diving into facets of aging like gerontology and caregiving, as well as physical and your mental well-being. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we will start with our presentation, Today, we're pleased to have with us today Mr. Eric Edmeades. He's the Canadian Senate Award winner. Mr. Eric Edmeades will be sharing with us the concept of hindsight window. This is a period of time between an event that you perceive to be bad and a point in time in the future where you have come to terms with that event. He will also give tips on how to shorten that hindsight window, cultivate a content and accepting state of mind, and grow in the face of adversity. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome Mr. Eric Edmeades, please. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here, and thanks for having me. This is going to be fun. So, the hindsight window. Before I dive directly into the hindsight window, I would love to just give a little bit of background. My background is in business and entrepreneurship, and I've had a couple of interesting different businesses in my past. And one had me get quite involved in research around military PTSD, and then another one of my businesses has been heavily involved in food psychology and helping people change their relationship with food. And a lot of that work has been related to my general curiosity and what drives human behavior, and also what seems to trap people in, let's say, not such resourceful emotional states. What I first of all want to suggest about this is that whenever one talks about mastering their state or managing their emotions or what have you, there's often feedback that suggests that that's like a way of not living, or it's like a way of pushing emotion down, which of course is not a particularly good idea. And instead, what I want to offer is that we recognize that our emotional states can be very useful to us as long as we apply them correctly. And what I mean by that is that I think we've all had the experience where we're having to interact with somebody or react to a certain situation, and the emotional state that we were in that moment might not have been the perfect emotional state for that interaction. I'll give you a great example. I imagine if anybody here has ever been in, say, a long-term romantic relationship where there were some heated debates, sometimes what'll happen is that one person will be saying things to the other person. It could be their husband, their wife, and even their children. And with their mouth and their anger and their hurt or their upset, they can be saying something, but there's another voice in the back of their head that's going, why are you talking to this person like this? Why are you doing that? It's almost like, we've lost control. And so when I talk about managing your emotional state or managing your sort of internal state of mind, it's not about repressing things. It's not about pushing them down. It's about recognizing that some emotions are not ideal in a given situation, and other emotions are ideal in those given situations. And the other thing about emotions that I think is really important to kind of think about is very often people look at emotions as good and bad. Like there are good emotions and bad emotions. So very often if I'm at a workshop, I will ask everybody to tell me the good emotions. And I think you can imagine what they would say. You know, the good emotions are happiness and love and gratitude. And they have all this idea of what the good emotions are. And then I go, okay, now tell me, what are the bad emotions? And the bad emotions are like anger and guilt and shame and on, right? And then what that leads me to suggest is that maybe there are no bad emotions. And maybe instead we have like rewarding emotions and say punishing emotions, or pleasurable emotions and uncomfortable emotions. And this is a very important thing to understand, because what seems to be going on a lot in the world these days is that people are finding ways to avoid uncomfortable emotions. And there are lots of things they can do to avoid uncomfortable emotions. Television, Netflix, social media. You can TikTok your emotions away for a little while, or Instagram, or whatever, Twitter, or whatever the case might be. But then, of course, some people also use food to escape uncomfortable emotions. And then, of course, well, if we're going to, then there's alcohol and, of course, drugs. And there's a variety of different ways that people escape uncomfortable emotions. And there's a number of problems with that. I'll focus on two for right now. The one being is that many of those behaviors are themselves destructive. So that's not so helpful. Like, you know, if somebody's having an uncomfortable emotion and they turn to alcohol to numb that uncomfortable emotion, well, that leads to its whole other set of problems. If they turn to food, too much of it or the wrong kind, well, that turns into a whole host of other problems. So that's one challenge with sort of avoiding the emotions. But then another challenge with avoiding the emotions is that, well, what if they were happening for a reason? Like, what if they were there to tell you something? And I think this is a very important distinction and a very important understanding. And I remember one day having a really strong personal experience of this, where I had been speaking. I'd been doing a lot of speaking with this one organization, and I loved speaking for their organization. It was so much fun. They always had the best locations around the world, off to Bali, then, you know, off to Jamaica. It was really like, you know, going to these cool events. And we loosely spoke that I would be speaking at the next event. But as that event was getting closer and I had booked my arrangements and I booked other things in that area at the same time, why not? I'm already going to be there. I got an email from the team at the company saying, you know, with this particular event, we've decided to go in a different direction. We'll definitely have you back in the future, but, you know, we've decided to go in a different direction. And frankly, that had never happened to me before. I'd never kind of had that. But my feeling in that moment was, let's think about it. I mean, I wanted to go. I had assumed that I was going. Now, let's be fair for a moment now. We had talked about me going, but, you know, we hadn't done contracts and bookings and stuff. I'd spoken at so many of them. It was now an assumption. And so when they said this to me, what were the emotions I was feeling? What can you imagine? I mean, I'm feeling maybe hurt, I disappointment, right? I'm not feeling good things, right? And so in that moment, I'm in the present moment. And in the present moment, I have chemicals, and the chemicals are hurt and this feeling of disappointment and so on. And so I did the wrong thing. I replied. I replied with the wrong emotional state. And we'll talk more about this, but it's very important. So I replied with the wrong emotional state. I wrote back and I go, I'm really disappointed to see this. I've already made my arrangements. I have other events in the region, blah, 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 blah. And then I did something really terrible. I hit send. I hit send. And so I wrote an email in the wrong emotional state. Then I hit send. I'm curious, have you ever done that? I certainly have just now. And then, so anyway, I hit send, and almost the moment I hit send, I had this sinking feeling. And then I felt a different and even more powerful and even more uncomfortable emotion. And that emotion was shame. I felt shame. I felt embarrassed and shameful about what I'd done, because I had written an email in an emotional state, and I know what the email was. It was a guilt trip. I was trying to, I was like not accepting what they had said, and I was, and in that moment, in that deep shame, all I really wanted to do was escape the shame. It was like I was immediately thinking, oh, who could I call? You know, what could I eat? Maybe I should go watch a movie. Or I didn't want to feel that way anymore, and I couldn't get rid of it. So I needed to distract myself from it. And then I stopped. And I said, no, hold on a second now. Maybe it's there for a reason. Maybe I need to be feeling this right now. And I sat with myself and I thought about it, and I thought about where the emotion was coming from and what it meant and what it was telling me. And I started writing a new email. And the new email I wrote was, hey guys, I'm really sorry about that last email I sent you. The truth of the matter is that after we spoke last time, I made an assumption that I would be speaking at this event. And I shouldn't have made that assumption. I should have waited until you confirmed it, as we usually do with a booking contract and what have you. And I was so disappointed because your events are so much fun that I reacted from the wrong position. And I'm very sorry about that. And then I hit send. And you know what? As soon as I hit send, I started to feel a bit better. And the reason I started to feel a bit better was because I had made a corrective behavior. You see, I had allowed the shame to be like a life coach for me. Shame was sitting over here going, dude, no, you shouldn't have sent that. Don't send that. Matter of fact, now you've sent it. You really should apologize. And so I did. And I apologized. I sent the email off. Then I started to feel better. And, you know, within about 5 minutes, I got an email back from the manager of the company saying, Eric, no problem at all. We were really disappointed too to not be able to book you this time around. And we totally understand why you would feel that way. And we're not judging you for it. And by the way, writing to us and apologizing was, I mean, what a beautiful thing. You didn't even need to do that. We totally understood right away. And everything was good. And there it is. Now let's check something out though. Is it likely, first of all, I cured my problem, right? I'm having this uncomfortable emotion and I cured it by going into it. I cured it by going into it and taking corrective action, apologizing, fixing what I'd done wrong, making amends. And so that's victory number one. But victory number two is magical. And that is that in the future, if I were to do that again, if I were to have that same feeling again, and I were to start writing that email again, guess what would happen? Because I had to apologize and I had to face the full discomfort and I didn't anesthetize or I didn't numb myself from the shame. If I try to do that behavior again in the future, my body's going to go, oh, hold on. Last time you did this, it made you feel very uncomfortable, and it will stop the behavior in the future. And so whenever I'm thinking of emotional states, it's not that I'm talking about the suppression of emotional states. I'm talking about the conscious utilization of emotional states. I'll give you one more example, and then I'll describe the hindsight window and how to close it, because this is a very powerful idea. One of the things that I've come to believe about our emotional states is that our emotional states are outdated. They evolved for a time when survival was incredibly difficult, when we didn't have, shelter, housing, electricity, hot and cold running water, television, internet. Our emotions evolved in a very different time, and they evolved to do very specific things that helped us survive. So if you were walking along in the forest and you saw a tiger in the forest, your body would react to that. You would take a sharp breath and your body would realize that you're in danger, and you would start producing a bunch of chemicals that would be designed to help you survive this situation. And 3 of those chemicals would be cortisol, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. And your body would start producing those things immediately. And what would happen when your body started producing those things? Well, a couple of things would happen. One, when you started producing the cortisol, you would start prioritizing sugar as a fuel so that you could be faster, fight, flight, freeze, that kind of stuff. And the other thing is that your body may start producing coagulants. In other words, your body might actually start preparing to clot your blood in case you have an injury. So even before you have an injury, your body's preparing you for this injury. But of course, the more blood sugar and then the thickening of your blood makes your blood a little harder to pump. So meanwhile, you start producing all this adrenaline that causes your heart to thunder in your chest to move this sticky blood around. And then equally, you're sending all this extra energy to the muscles to make you faster and stronger in case you need to run. But then at the same time that all this is happening, what else is happening is you're becoming very focused on your situation. In other words, your empathy is disappearing. So if you think about it, when you're not in danger, it's very easy to think about the whole planet and to think about all the people in your country or your city or whatever. But then when you start becoming a little more fearful, you might start becoming more concerned for your community. And then if you become really afraid, you might become concerned about just your family. And if you get scared enough, you'll get only worried about you. This is why somebody who is drowning is very dangerous, even to people who love them, because when they're drowning, they've lost all empathy. All they're trying to do is survive. And they'll even like push somebody they love under the water in their attempt not to drown. And this is an important thing to understand, because for most of our history as humans, we faced threats to our survival on a regular basis. Whereas most of us today, we're like, oh, that meal was so big, it nearly killed me. Like that's our biggest threat, right? Like most of us will not really face, some of us will, no question about it. But even those of us who do, it'll happen once or twice or three times in our lives. Whereas it used to be monthly or weekly occurrence, or maybe even daily in some cases. And so these chemicals that we have now, not as useful. They're not as useful as they used to be. Here's a good example. You're driving along in your car. Maybe you were going a tiny bit faster than you should have been. And then suddenly you hear it, that police sound and the blue lights in the mirror. And what happens as soon as you see all that is your body responds. And guess what? It produces those three chemicals: cortisol, noradrenaline, adrenaline. Guess what? You get stronger, you get faster, not useful. Your blood starts preparing for injury, not useful. You lose logic and empathy, not useful. And by the time the policeman comes up to the side of the car, maybe you're looking a bit nervous. Well, no wonder. You've got all these survival chemicals in you, even though you know the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to get a speeding ticket. It's not a big deal, but our bodies don't really understand not a big deal. Our bodies understand threats. And I like to talk about that before we discuss the hindsight window, because again, in discussing the hindsight window, we're not talking about suppressing emotions. We're talking about recognizing that certain emotions are not ideal in certain situations. And so what we want to do is learn how to manage our emotional states. So with that said, the hindsight window is a period of time, at least, the way I've theorized it is, it's a period of time that exists between an adverse event, an event that you regard as unpleasant or unfortunate or that you wish hadn't happened, and then the point in time in the future where you're actually like, hey, I'm really glad that happened. So, for example, somebody gets fired, you're fired, right? You're fired. And in that moment, you're like, oh my God, my life is over. Or we're breaking up. Oh my God, my life is over. It feels horrible. But then very often there's a time in the future, say, for example, from getting fired, where you're now in a new job or you've started your own business, and you look back and you go, wow, thank God I got fired. The minute you say, thank God I got fired, you've closed the hindsight window. Or let's say somebody dumped you, or you had to dump somebody and you had to break up, and you went through the heartbreak of all that and the pain of it and all that kind of stuff. But then one day, maybe you either, you meet somebody new and you're grateful for that, or you just get grateful for being on your own and out of that situation. And you go, oh my God, thank God that person dumped me, or thank God I had the guts to leave, or whatever the case might be. The minute you say that, the minute you go thankful, the minute you're saying, oh, I'm so glad that happened. Well, then you've closed the window. So that's the hindsight window, the period of time between an adverse event and the acceptance or even gratitude of that event as a gift. Now, another thing about that is that the longer that window is, the less enjoyment you can have of your life, the less comfort, fulfillment, and happiness you can have in your life, it seems to me. And the reason I say that is that it occurs to me that the more regret or guilt that somebody has about their past, the more fear or anxiety they feel about their future. In a sense, it's like, well, if the road has been bumpy so far, it's going to keep being bumpy, and so if you have a lot of regret and guilt and anger about the events of your past, then naturally you're going to prepare yourself for more of that and live with a higher degree of anxiety about the future. But the other side of that is, the more gratitude and appreciation you have for your entire past, the more faith you have that the future is coming serves you. In fact, one of my favorite expressions, you've probably heard this expression, but I say it a little differently than maybe the way you heard it. You've probably heard the idea that life is happening for you, not to you. I'm sure you've heard this. If you haven't, think about it. Life is happening for you, not to you. But I like to add something to it that adds a little power to that expression, in my opinion. And that is, life is always and consistently happening for you, not to you, especially when it doesn't seem that way. And that's a tough thing to understand. But what that means is that when life is tough, it's not tough to torture you, it's tough to toughen you. You might be familiar with the actor Morgan Freeman. I remember seeing him do an interview once. And in the interview, he said, look, if say you're religious and you're praying to God and you say to God, like, I want you to give me, I want you to give me perseverance. God, please give me perseverance. God doesn't just go, bam, now you're perseverance. God goes, well, then I'll come up with something for you to persevere through, and that'll give you the strength. I'm not going to give you the strength. I'm going to give you something to strengthen you. And so life is always happening for us and not to us. When we understand that's one of the ways that we can begin to address the hindsight window. So when we look at the hindsight window, there are events of our past where the window might still be open. So you probably know somebody in your life, or maybe you've done this to some degree, where something has happened in your past and you're still resentful about it. You're still angry at that person, or you're still hurt about it, or it's still open for you. And you probably know that if it is open for you, or if you know somebody that's got that kind of stuff that's open, then you can see that it affects the way they view the world. They don't trust life the same way they could, because they're holding on to this thing from the past. And if the past was yucky, well, the future probably is going to be too. So we can use the hindsight window to look at the past, but then there's also the future. There are events that we know trigger us, right? Like we have buttons. Don't push my buttons. I can be triggered by that. So then, we have the opportunity to look at the events of our future and say, well, are we going to let those things control us? And then, of course, the toughest thing is the present, like what's happening right here, right now. Can I deal with this? So what I want to suggest is that when we're looking at the past, that's a pretty complex thing. And, there are a lot of different ways to address the past. But when we're looking at the past, one of my favorite things to look at is the meaning of the event. And sometimes in diving into the meaning of a past event, I have found it for myself and for my clients that I'm able to close the window. And one example that I have of that is that I was working with a young woman who was really dealing with self-esteem problems, big self-esteem problems. And as we kind of dove into what was happening with her, it looked like a big part of that had to do with being abandoned by her one of her parents when she was young. And that was very difficult for her. She was very young when it happened. She was just old enough to see it happen and to experience it, but not old enough to really understand it. And it left her with a lot of resentment and a lot of anger toward that parent and so on. And so I had a conversation with her, and I asked her to tell me what happened that day, because she remembered it when she was 2-3 years old, and she remembered it. And I said, what happened? And she goes, well, I remember I was, sitting over in the corner, and the parent was, packing up bags and leaving and stuff. And it was her mother, and it was really painful. And she starts crying, and she says that, I was crying and she's crying, and she's describing the whole thing. And then I go, well, what does it mean? And it goes, well, it means my mother doesn't love me and doesn't care about me, and so on. And so I said, okay, let's break out of that. And we talked about something else, and I got her into a different state of mind, because I didn't want those chemicals, those emotional experiences in her at that moment. So then I said, now let's go back again and talk about that event from the past. But I said, this time, and she was a professional athlete, by the way. And I said, this time, what I want you to do is I want you to describe the event to me, but dispassionately, like they do sports announcing. Like I want you to go, well, there's a baby in the corner and there's a woman packing her bags, and describe it to me dispassionately. And so she did that. She goes, well, there's a baby sitting in the corner and the woman's packing her bags and the baby's crying and the woman's crying. And I go, well, why are they all crying? And she goes, well, they're crying because the woman is leaving and the baby doesn't understand and what have you. And I go, well, can you tell us why in this case is the woman leaving? And she says, the woman's leaving because she's realized that she's sick, that there's something not right up here, and that she's a danger to her child. And she's leaving because she loves her child so much And as soon as she said those words, she closed the window, because she suddenly realized the event didn't have any meaning. The event had the meaning that this 3-year-old her gave it, which was wrong. But now that she could see it through her adult wisdom, it had a totally different meaning to her. She was like, oh my God, my mother left to protect me because she loved me so much. And by the way, her mother came back to her life. That was proof of that. And so she was able to close the window. So there are many different techniques for closing windows in the past, but one of them, and I feel very powerfully, is to view the events of our past dispassionately and to look for the meaning, and to separate the event from the meaning we assess to it, and look for either the fact that there is no meaning at all, or assess a more proactive meaning, and then boom, that window can close, and then all of a sudden life can be different. So in a very real sense, we can clean up the past and close those windows by assessing a different set of meanings about what those things were. And there's another example I have of this, and it's very powerful. And it might be the event that got me thinking about this initially first, like really getting my curiosity going. But many, many years ago, I read a very difficult article, a very challenging story to read. And it was a story about 2 women in New York City in the United States. And they had both been sexually assaulted in Central Park, both of them in roughly at the same time. And the reason that this article was written is because the event had happened many, many years before, and they had both responded to it in very different ways. And so the article was examining the different ways that they responded to it. And so what basically happened is they both went through the same basic event. They both were sexually assaulted badly. And not that there's anything worse than badly, but they were hospitalized. It was bad. And both of them learned something interesting about that. And this is a horrible thing. But when that happens to a woman, it is more likely to happen to her a second time than it was the first time. Once that's happened to somebody once, they become a victim, and they start walking around often with a bit of victim energy. And the type of men that do those types of, they're spineless, weak, silly, they're bullies. They're not, and so they pick up on that weakness, and that's a dangerous thing. The one woman heard that, and the assault and this new information, and it just frightened her, and she stopped being willing to leave the house. She started getting involved in drugs and antidepressants, and then there was a few suicide attempts, and basically that one sexual assault ruined her life, like really ruined her life, and you can't blame her. But then the other woman, she learned that same information. And she said, well, I'm not walking around with fear, because she understood. She heard the information, and she realized the reason she was more likely to be assaulted again is because she might walk around fearfully. And she said, I'm not going to walk around fearfully. I'm going to go study self-defense. So she went off and she studied self-defense, and she learned some things. She learned, for example, that a credit card held just right in the hand can be like a knife. She learned that keys held between the fingers can make for a very effective defense weapon. She learned all this defense stuff. And a few weeks after the sexual assault, she was out for dinner with friends in New York. And after the dinner, they were all leaving, and her friend said, oh, do you want me to walk you to your car? Being sensitive to what she'd been through. Do you want me to walk you to your car? You see, and when you've been through something like that, everybody wants to protect you. Of course they do. And the trouble is that protection isn't going to make you stronger, right? Like, that's an interesting thing in itself. But she said, no, I don't want, I can walk to the car on my own. Really? After what happened? No, I'm fine. And she slipped her keys between her knuckles, and she walked down the street, basically saying, go ahead, make my day. Now, I don't know if that's responsible behavior, but I'll tell you what, the average spineless, wimpy rapist is not looking for that type of challenge. They're looking for somebody who's afraid. And guess what? It never happened to her again. And so her friends were amazed at how strong she felt. Now, remember, fear about your past, regret and pain and anger about your past means fear about your future. What's happening in her case, she's saying, I don't want to live with that fear. I don't want to live with that fear. So that's what she did. Now her friends start asking her, well, what did you learn? How do you feel that way? And so she's like, well, you should come to my class. And then she decided to start her own class. And then her classes were so full that somebody said, well, we should franchise this. And she ended up with like a chain of self-defense places. And then, now remember, I'm reading an article about this. And the guy who wrote the article, he asked her a very important question. He said, if you could go back in time right now, and you could prevent your own rape, would you? And she said, no, I wouldn't, which is shocking to me. I don't know if it's shocking to you, but it's shocking to me. But then you have to hear her whole answer. She says, no, I wouldn't. She says, first of all, I'm grateful that it happened because of the life that I get to live today and because of all the women that I have helped around America. I'm great. If that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have done all this. And she said, but even more importantly than that, the thing that I'm most afraid of is the fearful woman that I was even before it happened. I walk around with a sense of strength and confidence today that I never had before. And I get to live like that because that happened. So of course I wouldn't go back and undo it. Wow. I mean, that's powerful. That's really, really powerful. So again, what we're seeing in that case is we talked a little bit about, okay, something that was deep buried in your past, but now we've just walked through a situation where a woman went through something now and immediately decided to close that window, decided to close it. And we saw what happened, of course, with the woman who couldn't close the window. It ruined her life. So again, when you're dealing with the present, in a very real sense, the present is one of the toughest things to deal with because it's right now, and the chemicals in your body. And I had a very, very interesting experience of this in my life. And what happened was that I was in a casino in the Caribbean, and I was there with a girlfriend of mine, and we were just standing at the bar. We just ordered some drinks at the bar, and I don't drink, so it was a couple of waters, and there we are at the bar, and then all of a sudden we heard gunfire, like really serious gunfire. Apparently 4 men with assault rifles had walked in and they were shooting, and glass was exploding and people were screaming. And now remember what's going on in my body, what's going on all of our bodies, right? Adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol. What's happening? Speed, strength, but also a reduction of logic and a lack of empathy, a dropping of empathy as we become selfishly involved in our own survival. And I knew that. And I thought, I don't want that. And immediately I took a couple of really deep breaths and I just stopped and I said, what is really going on here? And I realized what's going on is either they're robbing the place or they're here killing people. And if that's the case, I don't want to be near people. Now realize everybody else is panicking and they're stampeding like a bunch of zebras being hunted by leopards. Or lions. They're just running down the hallway, and they're all in panic mode, and people are falling on the floor and being trampled. And we're right up against the bar. And I said, we're not doing that. And I saw there was a door. There was a door behind the bar. And I went around the bar. I grabbed my girlfriend by the hand, pulled her around, and we went into the door. And the door had a big sign on it. It said, authorized personnel only. This is a big hotel casino. And we opened the door, and where are we? We're in the kitchen. And I immediately was like, okay, we're in the kitchen. This is a good thing. This is a good thing because these guys that are here that are shooting, they're not here to make a sandwich. Like they're not, right? If they're here, they're either robbing or they're killing. And they're not, I mean, the odds of them coming into the kitchen are pretty low. That said, we're still going to hide. And so we then go off and we find a nice place to hide, and we wait, and everything's okay. And then they call the all clear, and we come out of there. And we were not traumatized by the event. We bumped into other people a week or two later, and they're like, they were not sleeping. They were under stress. Some of them were already taking drugs for their stress. We weren't traumatized by it at all. We did the right things. We maximized our chances of survival. Now, we were lucky. It turned out it wasn't a mass shooting. It was a robbery, and nobody actually got shot. But we couldn't possibly know that at the time. And what I'm suggesting is that had it been a mass shooting, had it been somebody in there killing people, and we just ran with the people, I don't know what would have happened. But because I handled the emotions in the moment, by taking a nice couple of calm breaths, by thinking in the moment consciously, we were able to get safely out of that situation. And that's what we all need to figure out sometimes, is how to create that moment when it's really big stuff, like a serious thing like that, or a car accident, but also when it's the little stuff. Like, here's a good example. I have the cutest, the sweetest daughter. She's amazing. And I don't mean cutest or sweetest compared to yours. I just mean in my model of the world, she's just amazing. And we were doing a bunch of filming at my house and in the Dominican Republic, where I spend most of the time. And we took a break for lunch. And we're sitting outside enjoying the ocean and the waves and the sun, and it's just beautiful. And then my little girl goes inside, and she's about 4.5 years old, and she goes inside, and I know she's in there, and suddenly I hear crash, smash, and I'm like, oh my God. And my first thought is, she's probably knocked over some of the super expensive camera gear or the lighting equipment that's in there. And I'm like, oh no, not ideal, not an ideal situation. And I jump up and I run inside. And immediately what I see is my unbelievably cute little girl standing in the living room, and there's glass and water all over the place. Now, we have these Wild Fit water bottles. They're made out of glass. They're beautiful, high quality. They're big, and she doesn't use them. I don't know why she was using them, but she'd obviously gone and filled it up with water. And it slipped out of her hand, and it dropped and hit the ground, and it exploded. So there was glass like everywhere and water everywhere. And there's electronic equipment around. And it's like, and what was interesting is I immediately had a flashback to my own childhood. And my dad had a big temper, and he shouting and that kind of stuff was not uncommon. So I know how he would have reacted. And what was interesting is I felt that come up in me, right? Because I'm afraid for my little girl, and the electronics and the glasses everywhere. And I felt that come up in me, like what I wanted to do. What were you thinking? What were you thinking? Right? That's what I wanted to do. They felt it, but I don't do that. I don't raise my voice at my children like that. I'm not going to do that. And so I just stopped and I said, hey, sweetie, why did you use the glass jar like that? And she looks at me and she goes, because I wanted to bring water for you, and the plastic bottle wasn't big enough. Oh my God, she's such a generous little girl. But wait a minute. Imagine that I had gone into a pattern and yelled at her. She had just done this incredibly generous thing. She like, remember, I don't know if you have children, but it takes a while for children to start becoming conscious of other people, right? They're very selfish for a long time. And then there's this magical moment where they start becoming thoughtful. And can you imagine? Here she is being thoughtful. And what if I yelled at her? What if I yelled at her in this thoughtful moment? Like, I'm so glad that I didn't. And I walked over, she was in bare feet and I had sandals on. So I walked through the glass and I picked her up and I gave her the biggest hug. And I said, you are the most generous, thoughtful, amazing little girl. Thank you so much. Now let me get you safe for the glass. And I picked her up and put her to the side. And then I was cleaning up the glass. And guess what? Then she went and got her sandals on and she came over to help me clean it up. And it was just magical. But here's the deal. That could have gone wrong so easily. And it does for so many people, because they let the event have an immediate effect on their biochemistry, and then they react through their fear or their anger. And in that case, I'm very glad that I didn't. And I can't tell you that I'm perfect about that, but in that moment, I'm very proud of the way I handled that. So again, we've talked about the fact that you can have these moments from your past, but then you also can have moments that come up in your present moment, and you have to be able to cope with those. But you know what else is interesting is real consciousness about you. When you really start to learn who you are, you can start to understand that you have events that might naturally trigger you, that might cause a behavior in you right away. So if you think about it right now, even, there are probably things that that irritate you, or that can make you mad, or that can get you angry, or that can make you sad, for example. And what's interesting about those things is that if you know about them, then maybe that creates the opportunity to kind of inoculate yourself so that those things don't necessarily have to trigger you in the same way. And I have a very good example of that from my life. And I don't know what driving is like in your various countries and so forth, but I can tell you that I lived in England for a long time, and in England, driving is an interesting game, because in England they do this thing. It's called road rage. They do it in Canada and America as well, but they're very good at it in England. And road rage, if you don't have it, probably it exists. But if in the United Kingdom, road rage is basically like this. Somebody cuts you off, or they don't let you in, or they do something nasty or whatever. And the next thing you know, you're yelling at them and you're showing them rude finger gestures and what have you. And I had found that here I can be the super calm parent over here, the super calm business owner over here, but get me in traffic. And I was like, I would lose my temper, and I would get really angry at people, and I'd yell at them and I'd be mad. And then I realized that on some level, it was like really affecting my life, because I guess what? I'm getting all this adrenaline and cortisol, stress chemicals. And then I'm showing up to a meeting, with a client, and I've got those chemicals in me. And you know what? People sense that kind of stuff. So you feel off to them, and you are off to them. And I was like, I don't want to live like this anymore. It's probably aging me also, right? I don't want all these stress chemicals in me. So like, I had to do something about this. And so I started thinking, what can I do about this? And this is what I decided, is that in England, football, soccer, we call it in North America. In England, they call it football. And I think you guys call it football. But I don't know if you know the rules of football. What happens when somebody commits a foul is they get a red or a yellow card, right? A yellow card is like a warning, bad player. Don't do that again, right? But a red card is like, you're out of the game. You're gone. And everybody in England knows this. Everybody in England knows this. I mean, even people who don't like football know this. It's such a part of the culture. So I went and got myself red and yellow cards and put them in the visor of my car. And I thought, instead of yelling at people or, giving them rude finger gestures or something like that, I'm going to show them the card, depending on how bad, what they did was. And so I'm driving along and somebody cut me off one day. It wasn't that bad. And I thought, red or yellow card. And I was like, you know what? Let it go this time. In the old days, there was no letting it go, right? No letting it go. And I suddenly was like, oh my God, I've interrupted the pattern. This is a very important idea in psychology. I interrupted the pattern of behavior. See, a lot of our behaviors are just patterned. They're just automatically happening. But I had interrupted the pattern by putting this new decision in there, red or yellow. And I didn't even do it. I was like, let the game go on. But then a couple of weeks later, I'm driving along, and a guy does a U-turn in front of me. He turns right in front of me. And worse than that, we're doing about 30 miles an hour, 50 kilometers an hour. There's not enough room on the other side for him. So he stops right in front of me, like dangerously. I have to slam on the brakes. I squeal, the wheels squeal, slam on the brakes. The seatbelt engages me. Guess what? Adrenaline, right? And I was like, that's a red card offense for sure. I grabbed the red card, and I'm driving a convertible. So I sit up tall and I show him the red card. And he busts out laughing. He immediately starts laughing. And all the cars over here, because they heard me come to a sliding stop, right? They heard my tire screeching. They're all looking because we almost had an accident. And then they see me stand up and show. All of them are laughing. And he's laughing and I'm laughing. And then something miraculous happened. He apologized. Now, no combination of yelling at somebody or giving them rude finger gestures has ever resulted in an apology before. This guy apologized, and then he pulled in when he had space, and I waved goodbye to him, and we all had fun, and everybody else had fun. And my life was transformed because I was no longer having this jolt of negative chemicals, because I'd found a pattern interrupt that would prevent that behavior. And so when you've got triggers or buttons, it's a good idea to analyze those things and to understand where they're from and to decide whether or not you want to be trapped by them. These days, it's very easy. A lot of people are talking about offense these days. Oh, I'm offended by that. Well, I would simply put it to you this way. The easier you are to offend, the easier you are to control. Offense is something that people offer. And in English, we say you take offense. You literally take it. And that's because people have buttons and they have triggers. And so if you have buttons and triggers, it's a good idea to look at them and understand them and try to figure out what you can learn from them, and then potentially develop a technique for not letting them bother you anymore. And this is not emotional suppression. I wasn't suppressing my anger. I wasn't experiencing it anymore because I had found that pattern interrupt. So to wrap it up, the hindsight window is the period of time between a bad event, an event that you think of as bad, and the day that you realize that it was just a sour note in an otherwise perfect symphony that is your life. And if you can close all of your past windows and neutralize yourself against present windows, and if you can do that, then you will develop a sense of powerful appreciation and gratitude for your past. And remember, the more gratitude you have for the past events of your life, the more faith you will wake up with every day, the more faith you will deal with. And matter of fact, if it works out really well and one day you do get fired, it'll go like this. You're fired. Thank you. Because you'll close the window right away. So hindsight window, If you can find them, close them. You will improve your quality of life dramatically. I hope this has been informative, fun, and interesting for you. And if it has, come find me on Instagram and share the story with me one day. I love hearing about hindsight windows that people have closed.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Eric Edmeades. Fantastic sharing there. I really love the analogy about the yellow card and the red card. That's something maybe perhaps we could be exploring here in this part of the world, right? But anyway, thank you very much. I'd like to ask you to stay on the line because we're going to move on to the Q&A segment, ladies and gentlemen. So Mr. Eric Edmeades will be answering questions posted by all of you. So if you have any questions now, please put it into the Q&A chat box. Just click on the button and you can start to submit your questions. But I would like to introduce our moderator for this session is Dr. Vimalan Manukara, Director, Minds Institute. Dr. Vimalan is a registered psychologist in Singapore with a PhD medicine from the University of Sydney, Australia. He has more than 12 years of experience in the field of disability and in a variety of roles: clinical practice, research and analytics, innovation, training and management. He currently holds the position of Director, Minds Institute with Minds, a social service agency in Singapore. His research interests includes quality of life, aging, inclusion, and employment of persons with disabilities and seniors. In 2021, he was recognized by the National Council of Social Service as a 40 under 40 leader for the social service sector. More recently, he was awarded the prestigious 2022 Dr. John C. Harsanyi Medal for Innovation by the University of Sydney in recognition for his groundbreaking PhD work amongst other innovative initiatives locally as well as internationally. So before I hand the time over to our moderator, gentle reminder once again, please submit your questions via the Q&A icon either on the top or the bottom of your screen. You can also upvote questions that you want answered as well. Just click on the like button. So without further ado, over to you, Dr. Vimalan.
Thank you. Thanks, Lester. And thanks, Eric, for the very insightful sharing. I was so engrossed at one point, I had to remind myself to take some notes so that I'm moderating later on and I have some notes for that. But it was indeed a very insightful sharing. And me being a psychologist by training and practice, I can really relate to a lot of the concepts you were sharing on the hindsight window. And yeah, so I think let's do this. Okay, let's first go with some questions which we already have on the chat, and then I might pose some of my own questions later on for you. I think the first question we have is, what if you're unable to let go of the guilt, didn't find acceptance within yourself, even after trying? And give me a second. Even after you have tried to apologize. So how do you move forward from there? I think that's in relation to your initial example of the email. Yeah. I think the question came on around that time. So if you could just shed some light on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things that I've come to think about the way we think is that we really generate hardware with our thoughts. Like, we create actual neural pathways with our thoughts. And so as we get older and older, many of our thought pathways become more deeply entrenched. And this is why, some of us probably have parents or grandparents that have to eat at exactly the certain time, have to watch their show at a certain time. They get quite rigid because they in a sense, it's like they're in the same way that their body gets less flexible as they age, their mind gets less flexible as they age. And we have to be careful of that. So sometimes what will happen is that, let's say you've done something and you're feeling the shame and the guilt, and now you've apologized for it. The shame and the guilt might be a leftover echo. It might be a leftover pattern that is resulting from two things. One, the pattern of living with it. And the other one is, you might not totally trust yourself not to do it again. And that's what I think is usually the bigger thing. So let's say in my case, I wrote that email, the first one, and I felt all the shame and the guilt about it. And then I wrote an apology. But if I was afraid that I might do it again, I might still feel the fear and the guilt and the shame about it, because it's like, yeah, but I don't trust myself. I don't trust myself. I don't trust myself. Now, in my case, the shame was so painful to me and apologizing was so embarrassing for me that as I did it, I'm like, I am never doing this again. And so it really, truly dissipated the shame away. But I have had other stuff in my life where I've done something and I've like, oh, that's a bit of a pattern. Like, I used to lose my temper. I rarely ever get angry about anything now, but I used to be like, I had quite a violent temper. Not violent. I don't mean violent. I just mean loud. And so what would happen is then I would apologize, but the guilt would still be there. And I realized that the reason the guilt was still there is that I knew the behavior was still there. And so I would say that if you're having difficulty letting go of the guilt or the shame about the event, even after you've apologized, then there's a couple things I would consider. One is making a much more sincere apology. And let me explain what I mean by that. In order for somebody to accept an apology from you, to really accept an apology from you, what they really need to know is that what you did to them hurt you as much as it hurt them. If they get that, if they really get that, you see, and it's not like that for most people. People are like, oh, I'm really sorry about that. Oh yeah, I'm sorry about that. They just throw sorry away like it's a Mozambican dollar. Like it has it means nothing. And it's just been eaten away by I'm sorry inflation. But on the other hand, what I did with my email is I wrote to them and I told them fully what was going on. I said, I'm so sorry I wrote this. I made the assumption. This is on me. I am responsible in every conceivable way, and I'm embarrassed by my behavior. And it's so painful to say those things that you don't want to go through it again. And so maybe that's the idea, is that next time you apologize, like you want to like make sure that the recipient knows that the pain and discomfort you caused them caused an equivalent or maybe even more pain and discomfort in you, guaranteeing you won't do it again. And you may find that helps you to release the guilt or shame.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for that. And I'm just also linking what you just said to this probably identifying new patterns of behavior. I think one of the reasons could be because, as you mentioned, you feel shame because you know the behavior is still there. And so it's about how then do we attach meaning as to why we behaved in that way, and then try to identify and apply new patterns of behavior. And once we have new patterns of behavior, then it kind of attaches new meaning to the past event, and that probably would then help you to manage future events, irregardless of whether the person had accepted your apology or not, because you wouldn't be affected by that in that sense. That if that makes sense, I mean,
Very
that's
much.
how I kind of interpreted it. Yeah.
Very much. In fact, I'm glad you brought that up, because what I did that day is I made a rule. I didn't even think about this. I'm really glad you said that. I made a rule that day, and that the rule I made is that I could no longer draft emails in the email client. I had to draft them in Google Docs, and therefore I had to put more thought, and I wasn't allowed to send them while I'm feeling the emotion. I could write them feeling the emotion, because sometimes emotion is a very creative thing, but I couldn't send them while still feeling the emotion. And so since I made that rule, I knew that I wasn't going to do it again. And it's been years. I have not done anything like that again since.
Yeah. Yeah. And you would probably feel less of a fear or anxiety, about future emails, future correspondence, because you have this new pattern of behavior, that you're not going to click send. So that kind of, indirectly also helps, to use your words, the future happened for you in that sense.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. Going back to before, I can go on about this, but it's some more questions on the chat. It's hard to be dispassionate about a situation that has affected you so much. How do you do that? So I'm not sure if this is in relation to a specific example that you shared. But yeah, how would you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, to be clear, I don't have a formal training in psychology. I just am fascinated by it. So I use metaphors to kind of describe this stuff. And one of the ways I think of the metaphor is, and I like this metaphor a great deal, is that we are like a ship, and the ship, there's a crew, and then there's a captain, and the captain is the consciousness. And that's what separates us largely from most animals, is animals are largely just a crew. There's no captain. The animal's just doing what it's supposed to do. It's just following whatever its instincts are. And we have the ability to not follow our instincts. For example, we can jump out of a plane. Like we can, matter of fact, forget jumping out of the plane, we can get on a plane. I mean, that's not instinctual behavior, right? And so there's all kinds of things that we are able to use our consciousness to do or not do that might be different than our instincts. So once we recognize that that's true, What we then want to take a look at is, well, what about when something happens that is so shocking and jarring that the crew basically takes over, or the amygdala, right? Like, what do we do when that part of the brain kicks in and you go straight to fight or flight? What happens in that situation? I'll give you another example. Many years ago, I'd been on tour for about 6 months. And I come home, I was married at the time, and my wife and I came home. We had almost everything we owned with us because we'd been on this extensive tour around the country. So we had 7 suitcases, almost all of our possessions were there. Plus I had just been visiting with some hunter-gatherer tribes in Africa. I'd been visiting with some chimpanzees, wild chimpanzees, and I had all the videography and none of it backed up, all in the bags. And as we got home to the Dominican Republic, we got home, and our driver, I'll never know exactly what happened with him, but our driver, we stopped at the grocery store because we knew we had no groceries at our place. And while we were in the grocery store, our driver texted his friends and had them come and steal all of the stuff out of the car, all of it. And we came out with the groceries, and I was like, oh, the bags are gone. And my first thought was, well, the driver moved the bags to make room for the groceries. But then suddenly I realized, no, they're gone. Now let's stop down and go second by second by second, right? Because we know at this point, time starts becoming very strange once the adrenaline is kicking in. So the minute I realize the bags are gone, I start pumping adrenaline. My heart starts boomba, boomba, boomba. And I start feeling it. And my peripheral vision starts to fade a little, like, because I'm very focused on what's happening right now. And I'm feeling the anger and all this stuff. And this is seconds in. But immediately as I'm thinking that, I stop and I go, is anger the best emotion right now? No. If they were there right now, stealing the bags, anger might be useful. Anger might be useful in that moment. I could shout, I could fight, I could defend, but they're gone. So right now, anger is going to do nothing for me. And this is a very tough thing. It's a tough thing. My amygdala is in charge. It's full of adrenaline and cortisol, and my muscles are strong. But I just forced the question, is anger the right emotion right now? And angrily, no. What emotion would be better right now? Calm, because calm might help us to solve this problem. Can I access calm? No. Like, this is what's going on in here. And I go, is it possible one day that I'll look back on this and laugh? Yeah. Okay. If that's possible, why might I do that? Well, I'll tell you one thing. My wife and I are like workaholics sometimes, and we would come back from the tour and we would jump right back into our laptops and we'd start working. And our laptops are gone, and it's going to take 2 to 3 weeks to get them shipped here from America. So we're going to have to take 2 or 3 weeks of vacation. That's not a bad thing. And by the way, my wife, she was terrible about clothes. She just would never let me buy her clothes. And I was like, and I'd promised her, I'd sold a business, and I promised her I'm going to take her on the biggest clothing shopping spree. And she just would never do it. And now she has no choice. And by the way, her Mac, for what it's worth, her Mac was like 4 years old, and I was somehow her IT manager, and it was dying all the time. And I was like, and I finally get to buy her a new Mac. And I'm sitting there now listen, we're 16 to 30 seconds into the event, and I'm already finding reasons that this event is not bad. Already, I'm right there. And the people are around me, and one guy's shouting for the police over here, and I'm sitting there. And suddenly I turn around and I turn to my wife and I put my hands on her shoulders, and I said, honey, everything's going to be okay. And she said, she's crying, and no, stop. I'm telling you right now, everything's going to be okay. And she goes, how do you know that? And I go, I'm already grateful that this happened. She goes, what? I go, I'm just telling you, I'm grateful. She goes, why? And I go, this and this and this. And she goes, that doesn't sound so bad after all. I go, that's right. I said, and imagine if this happened to us like 3-4 years ago. It would have been much more difficult for us economically. It would have been so a little perspective. All of a sudden, she's not mad. I'm okay. Now, guess 2 real big things come out of this. 3. 1, we don't scar ourselves with all these chemicals. We just don't. And the second thing is, when the police started doing the investigation, I used to own a film studio in Northern California. So I know a lot about video and video capture and editing and what have you. Guess who was editing all the CCTV footage to try to solve the crime? Me, in the crime lab. They literally let me go into they gave me the copies of the files. They let me do it all. They would never have done that if I was irrational and angry and shouting. Never. But because I was so calm, they were blown away. And they're like, this guy can be involved in the investigation. I'm not kidding you. But then there's one more thing. And this is so important because it's kind of doubles up on the whole hindsight window principle. I once, many years ago, had my house broken into and had had some stuff stolen. And I remembered one of the things that's really hard about that is that like 3 weeks later, you go to look for something and you realize it's gone. And then the pain comes back. Oh, again, right? And I knew about that. Remember, know your triggers. So I went to my wife and I said, listen, over the next couple of weeks, maybe even months, you will occasionally go and reach for something and it will be gone. And that might bring back the trauma of today, unless you realize that we live in a third world country. And even though it is criminals that took our stuff likely ended up with people who really needed it. Like in this country, what we just did is a huge act of charity, even if the criminals are going to make money on it. And I said this to her, and I kid you not, 2 weeks later, I'm sitting working, she comes into the living room. She goes, Eric. And I go, what? And she goes, there's a beautiful girl somewhere here in the Dominican Republic wearing that gorgeous Dolce & Gabbana dress of mine. And I go, what? And then she said, she suddenly wanted to go get her dress out of the closet. She didn't realize it was in the bags. But because I told her to picture it that way, it didn't re-traumatize her. I had eliminated the trigger.
Thank you, Eric. So I'm just linking that actually what you managed to do when you came back to the car and you realized it was missing was you managed to exercise that moment of pause. And I think that was key because and I think that's probably the critical moment because in your previous example, your red card, yellow card was kind of facilitated that moment of pause, but you managed to do the same thing here as well, and that was the moment of pause allowed you to attribute new meaning to that particular situation and see things in a different frame. Compared to what you would if you just got your emotions, or your instincts got the better of you, and so on and so forth. So I think that to me was how I would have seen, or interpreted how you have just explained in that sense. So let's go on to the other questions. How do you deal with pride problem? That's one of the question. I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question right, but probably pride to me at least, pride kind of kicks in greater when there's it's not just you and the problem, and if there's other individuals around that are implicated, and then how might your actions be perceived? And I guess if I'm interpreting it that way, then that's how do you deal with that? I guess it's easier if it was just to use your example. For example, if your wife was making it harder for you, right, when you tried explaining to her this other way of looking at this situation, and she was like, throwing a fit and saying, oh, how can you say that things are okay, and it makes it harder for you as an individual, to deal with it. So then, how do you manage that?
I read that question from Joyce a little bit differently, and this is
sure. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
What I'm thinking is that imagine again, I wrote that wrong email.
Yeah.
And what is the emotion that I'm experiencing? First of all, I was experiencing hurt, heartbreak, disappointment. Now I've written the email and now I'm filled with shame and guilt because I know I shouldn't have sent this email, right? What is the emotion that will prevent me from apologizing or prevent me from apologizing properly? Pride. That's the emotion that would stop somebody. And in that moment, I'm too proud to apologize. And this is a major issue. This is a major issue. So Joyce, it's a great question. At least if I'm thinking of your question the right way, it's a great question. And so what I would say to you like this is you really want to start to recognize that pride is a very valuable emotion as long as it's not holding you back. It's very good to feel proud about your accomplishments in life, but it's not good to allow proud to stop you from developing yourself as a human being. And so all emotions are like that. They're good when they're applied correctly, and they're not good when they're used incorrectly. So what I would say is that if you've ever been in a situation where you've done something that you feel shameful about, and you know that you should make amends, you know that you should apologize, but you're feeling resistance about apologizing, resistance about admitting you were wrong, right? Pride, then it's likely pride that's in the way. And this is all I would say to you is you should just immediately right now today, accept this truth. When you feel pride in that moment, it is holding back your spiritual growth as a human being. And if you can know that, and maybe just because I said it this one time, the next time it happens to you, you might do something and you might want to apologize or not want to apologize. And then suddenly you're like, oh, it's my pride that's holding me back. And it's not just holding you back from apologizing, it's holding you back from your development as a human being. And so again, You should feel proud about your children. You should feel proud about your accomplishments. But the minute pride steps in the way of you developing yourself as a human being, then it is an obstacle. And what you have to do at that point is like, really, it's just like this simple. You just got to go, I'm going to break through. I'm going to break through. And by the way, I like the word breakthrough because I think breakthrough is metaphorical, but I think it's also literal. And what I mean by literal is, in a sense, it's like you've got this thought, I've done something bad and I have a pathway for that. And I've got this other thought, I know I should apologize. I know I should make amends, but there's a pride block in the middle of it. It's right there in the middle. And what you need to do is quite literally break through that and send the neurons all the way through. And the beautiful thing is a breakthrough creates a new neural pathway. It literally creates a new wiring. And it's very thin, that wiring. It's very thin. It's like a filament. It's a thin wiring. But the next time you do it, it gets a little thicker. And the next time you do it, it gets a little thicker. And so what you'll find is you become less inclined to do the bad behavior in the first place, and you become more inclined to make amends and not be held back by your pride.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric. I'm just reminded that we're running out of time actually, but it's great. I mean, it shows how insightful your sharing has been. We're getting more and more questions. I'm just going to try to pick a couple of key questions and
I'll try to be quick
and try to link them together. So if you can just give us some guiding techniques or quick solutions or actions that we can take. How do we, in terms of how we process our emotions and make and introduce new decision making? So yeah, what would be some quick techniques or tips? If you could just summarize it for us. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, let's do that. So you already kind of nailed a part of this, and that's that, like you've noticed that part of what I'm doing is creating an interruption in the current behavior. In fact, and using that opportunity to assess a new meaning. I actually call those moments Frankl moments, and they're named after Viktor Frankl, who wrote one of the most important books in the world, I believe, and that's Man's Search for Meaning. And Viktor Frankl told us that there is a moment between stimulus and response. There's a moment between stimulus and response. And in that moment is your liberty and freedom as a human being. And so if you let your amygdala take over immediately, you're giving up that freedom as a human being. You're acting like an animal in that case. But if you bring your consciousness in and you create that Frankl moment, then you can stop for a second. You can stop when you hear that your little girl crashed the thing and put herself in danger, and you might want to yell at her and all that kind of stuff. But you stop for a moment. You go, what is the right thing for me to be doing in this situation? You introduce a Frankl moment. When you open the car door and you see all the stuff is gone, then you stop and you go, wait, is anger the best emotion? So that's one of the techniques, is immediately to ask yourself, is this emotion the optimal emotion for this situation? Now, sometimes I say this on social media and people go, you're talking about suppressing your emotions. No, I'm not. I will tell you that you can process the emotion later. But in this moment, anger is not going to help. How is it going to help me to be angry at the policeman? Not helpful at all. So a really great pattern interrupt, a really great way to create that Frankl moment is when you feel the emotion coming up, is you ask yourself, is this the best emotion for this situation right now? And your mind is likely to scream back at you, no, but I don't care. I'm still going to do it. You go, I know, but what emotion would be better for this situation right now? Well, compassion might be better in this situation right now with my little girl, might be better, right? Compassion. And then you go, all right, what would have to happen? This is the key question right here. What would have to happen for me to access compassion right now? Not how do I get it? Not can I get it? What would have to happen for me to access compassion right now? And it's a very important question, because then you start, and what happened with the cars, I thought, well, I'd have to find gratitude, and I'd have to realize that one day I will be grateful for this and what have you. And then the chemicals flush out. And by the way, this is so important. The quicker you have the Frankl moment, the better, because it's one thing to have to flush all those negative, well, not negative, but let's say uncomfortable chemical emotions out of your body. That's one thing. But what's even better is you can stop them producing in the first place. So the event happens and you immediately create the Frankl moment, and you don't get flooded by them. You just get a sampling of those emotions and a sampling of those chemicals, and then you stop your body from producing them. It's even better. So that's the core thing. You want to figure out ways of creating the Frankel moment, that moment of freedom. And one of the best ways to do that in the moment is this emotion the best or optimal emotion for the experience I'm having right now? No. What would be the best, most optimal emotion to handle this situation right now? And what would have to happen for me to access an emotion right now? And by the way, I'm not suggesting this is an easy thing to do the first time. It's a skill that you develop.
Yep. Thanks, Eric. I think what you is basically saying is that when you identify what is the emotion that will help you to manage the situation right now, and for example, compassion could be one, then you start associating or asking yourself what behaviors or actions would be associated with that, and then you try to practice or put in place those actions, and then I guess that kind of also explains how you would then begin to attach new meaning to that situation that you have experienced, and how it would help the future work happen for you in that sense. I think I know we've got more questions, but unfortunately, I'm told we've come to the end of the question and answer session. Eric, thank you so much for your really insightful sharing and your patience and your answers to all the queries. Yep, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, moderator Dr. Vimalan. Thank you very much, Mr. Eric Edmeades. Fantastic presentation, great Q&A session as well. I got to be honest, I'm guilty as well. When you're so angry and then you draft an email and then you click send and you're like, oh no, So great insights there. So thank you very much to Mr. Eric Edmeades and Dr. Vimalan for moderating that Q&A session. So we'd like to move on now. So ladies and gentlemen, this event today is brought to you by NLB. So we'd like to share some of the NLB resources that are available to all of you. So I'd like to welcome NLB's librarian Mastura here to share with us some of the resources that will be available and are available to everyone.
And I'm here to share the recommended resources to supplement today's insightful topic by Mr. Eric Edmeades. So next slide, please. So in this slide, the team has created a one-stop resource page where you can find all our recommended resources for Time of Your Life Celebration 2022. So all you need to do is scan the QR code on your screen or click on the link in the chat box to access it. So my colleague will be doing so. Yeah. Next page, please. And for this slide, these are some of the recommended reads. So the first book, How Emotions Are Made, The Secret Life of the Brain by psychologist and neuroscientist, Mr. Feldman Barrett. It's a book I personally enjoy. The author dissects emotions and processes of it, and that perhaps the way we respond via emotions on top of the biochemistry responses of the brain is based on our individual experiences, which Mr. Eric Edmeades brought attention to earlier on in his sharing. The second, The Earned Life, Lose Regret, Choose Fulfillment by Marshall Goldsmith and Mark Reiter. The authors of this book shares the concept of earned life and how our lives reside on a continuum that journeys between regret and fulfillment. So written during the pandemic, the book asks the reader to do a little soul searching of their past and present experiences. And if you like to be on that journey and how this helped in gaining an intentional and earned life, so this book is for you. And lastly, the Little Book of Silver Linings, Finding Joy in the Toughest Times by Sky Banyas, uses both words and art to illustrate that despite the challenges, there is beauty in life and living. Though bite-sized, the author creates moments through her words and art that allow the readers a space for deep reflection. So all of these books and more are available in our e-collection. Next slide, please. Okay. And if you're looking for courses to learn at your own pace, do give Udemy Business a visit. So one of our NLB resources, this is a free online learning platform with over 13,000 courses available. So all you need to do is log in through your NLB mobile app or via the website as shown on the screen using your My Library username and start your learning journey by entering keywords pertaining to the subject matter. Next slide, please. So taking good care of yourself is very important for your physical, mental, emotional well-being. It's vital that you find the right balance in your busy schedule to give yourself some love and care. So the aim of this resource is to provide you with a selection of resources in these areas to enhance your well-being for a fuller and more enjoyable life. So just download this list by scanning the QR code or via the website as shown on the screen. Next slide, please. And this is the final slide. So NLB has also consolidated a list of other resources. This includes information on the NLB mobile app, Goodreads for the 50+, a dedicated publication for those aged 50 years old and above, featuring articles and book reviews that cover topics such as digital literacy, wellness, sustainability, careers, and the arts. If you're also keen to find out what we did in the past editions of the celebration, you can check them out through this link. So I hope all you I hope you'll find all these resources useful. And with that, I pass the time back to our MC Lester. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mastura, for sharing with us a lot of the resources available. So if you don't already know, the NLB has a lot of resources available for everyone. In fact, the app is actually very, very powerful. Okay, so some of the books that Mastura mentioned is actually those are actually ebooks, so you can borrow them directly and read it at your own free time. You don't even have to go to the library. Right now, of course, I just want to highlight as well, if you don't already know also, right, you can read the Straits Times, you can read all your favorite magazines within the NLB mobile app as well. That is how powerful it is, and the best part is it is free. All right, so you don't have to go and buy a newspaper. You can read the e-version, and it's absolutely free, all from the power of the NLB mobile app. All right, so do take some time to explore all the resources available. On the screen as well, you can see you can scan the QR code that you see in front of you for a list of all the resources available. Alright, so this event jointly also organized by the Singapore University of Social Sciences. So they do have many different programs on gerontology as well. So if you look at this slide in front of you, now you can take a PhD, master's, or if you're just wanting to get started, right, you can do a minor, right, and then you can move on. If you find that you have passion within this field, the gerontology field, you can take a graduate certificate, you can take a move on graduate diploma, and then go to master's and then PhD as well. So there are many such resources available. All right, so if you're interested, you can follow us on our Facebook page, SUSS Geron SAC, or if not, you can always just check out the websites as you can see on the screen. Hey, have a great Saturday. Bye-bye.